All right. Well, I keep marveling at producer Jim's ability to find like the most uh, dramatic music with the countdown doomsday clock. It's very fitting, actually. Hello and welcome to State of Play on MintPress News, your bi-weekly geopolitical news stream where we will be talking about journalism in the face of unconscionable war crimes, and we will be asking the fundamental question: is journalism as a formal institution dead? It seems like objective truth is completely subservient to elite corporate and political interests, and nowhere is this more exemplified than in the targeting of journalists in the Gaza Strip. I'm your host, Greg Stoker. We're going to be joined by a conflict journalist who went into Fallujah in Iraq in 2004, independently to film a documentary. She's also done a lot of other work, and we're going to be talking about what happened to the Gazan journalist Anas al-Sharif and his Al Jazeera colleagues yesterday. What does it mean going forward? And yes, the world as a whole is a lot less safe. By the way, if you're watching the video, I know you guys are a lot of audio listeners because now we are on all podcast platforms. But my actual fancy camera isn't working, so you're just gonna have to deal with the bad video quality. Apologies. I usually don't do my military bio, but since we might have some new folks around here, I'll restate it. I am a former U.S. Army Ranger with a background in special operations and human intelligence collection. I conducted 4 combat deployments to Afghanistan, and now I'm an anti-imperialist activist and journalist. This is relevant because we're going to be discussing the airstrike that killed these journalists yesterday, how it was effectuated, the technology used, and examine the military propaganda used to justify it. Essentially, I'm going to argue that there is no way it wasn't an intentional strike. I mean, everybody knows that, but we're going to break down why in case you have a problematic uncle that you need to have talking points for. So the bottom line is some of you are going to have to, not you guys, but other people who don't watch the show, some of you are going to have to explain to your grandchildren how third-grade military propaganda turned you into a genocidal lunatic cheering on the death of doctors, journalists, mothers, and innocent men and children. Good luck. Going to take some serious mental gymnastics. But at least the Democratic Party has a new moral champion willing to stand up for what's right. As some of you are still filling into the live episode, we're going to take a minute to reflect on human chat GPT Pete Buttigieg's recent appearance on Pod Save America. He is being floated as one of the Democratic hopefuls for a president run.
Human suffering in Gaza.
Do you think it's time to recognize a Palestinian state?
I think that's a profound question that arouses a lot of the biggest problems that have happened with Israel's survival, Israel's right to survival in the diplomatic scene. And many of the people who have taken that step historically have done so for different reasons than what we see happening with European countries. I think we need to step back and we need to do whatever it takes to ensure that there is a real two-state solution and that no one, not even the likes of Netanyahu, can veto the international community's commitment to a two-state solution where you have Palestinians and Israelis living with safety, with security, with rights. I believe that can happen, but we have to actually show some commitment to it.
Okay, well, that meant absolutely nothing, and it's the same kind of doublespeak that they've been doing. Of course, the framework of the two-state solution is basically just a political and narrative mechanism to keep kicking the can down the road so they never actually have to do anything about it. And like a lot of the neoliberal messaging coming out right now, if we were going to put it into a nerd context, is like, save the empire from Darth Vader, save the galaxy from the rebels. It's like, you guys are so lost. But as society gets more and more militarized and the Constitution moves closer and closer to the paper shredder, we must remind ourselves as we watch President Trump deploy the Army National Guard to wage a war on the homeless in Washington, D.C. here in America. Check this out. And check out his announcement from this morning.
A historic action to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, and worse. This is Liberation Day in D.C., and we're going to take our capital back. We're taking it back under the authorities vested.
Violent crime is at a 30-year all-time low in Washington, D.C., by the way.
In me, as the President of the United States, I'm officially invoking Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. You know what that is? And placing the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department under direct federal control, and you'll be meeting the people that will be directly involved with that.
So this episode's really about Gaza, but I wanted to take this one news item about him calling in the National Guard to wage a war on the homelessness in Washington, D.C., because it's all part of the same class. This is not a result of Trump's fascism, neither this act or what's happening in the Gaza Strip right now, but it's also a result of the Democratic Party's capitulation. The D.C. Council just passed a budget in order to protect themselves and their seats of power from the wrath of the Trump administration. What was in this budget? They cut the child tax credit, zeroed it out. They're kicking 27,000 people off of their health care. They have no vouchers for unhoused individuals. And while they are making a deal that is worth $2.2 billion with the Washington Commanders, the local NFL football team, in order to bring the stadium back. Now, Muriel Bowser, the Democratic mayor that is all over this democratically led city, also stripped out protections for workers within this budget, and the DC Council approved it. And also she tried to strip out sanctuary city status through the budget, but it's not a budget item, by the way. So I said all that to say that when you hear people simply describing what is happening in DC, the takeover in DC, as something that is purely at the feet of the Trump administration, please know that they are running cover for the Democratic City Council and party at large. They are running cover for Muriel Bowser, who is not a deer in the headlights at this time, but an active participant in the fascism that is taking over the imperial capital. Same thing with the Gaza Strip. Now that Biden's no longer in power, the Democrats are like, we can't do anything. We'll just put Pete Buttigieg on Pod Save America, ran by former Obama speechwriters, and he'll say a bunch of word salad that means nothing, okay? Because when it all comes down to it, they are in a big club, one big club, and you are not in it. They will agree on police, they'll agree on homelessness, they will agree on foreign wars and the desolation of Gaza, which brings us to the assassination of Al Jazeera's last news crew last night in Gaza. Here are some initial reporting from the outlet itself.
This is Al Jazeera breaking news just coming out. Sad breaking news out of Gaza, where Al Jazeera journalist Anas al-Sharif has just been killed in what appears to be a targeted Israeli strike. All of this according to the director of the Al-Shifa hospital. Anas was killed after a tent for journalists was hit outside the main gate of the hospital. The well-known Al Jazeera correspondent reported extensively from northern Gaza. The 28-year-old was a key source of news from Gaza City and the north for international audiences since Israel's war on the Strip began some 22 months ago. Al Jazeera media network had recently denounced the Israeli military for what it called a campaign of incitement against Anas al-Sharif. Al-Sharif was one of the journalists the Israeli military accused of being a member of Hamas's military wing. The UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, has earlier denounced serious threats against the Al Jazeera journalist by the Israeli army. And what's more is the Council for the Protection of Journalists had also been concerned about his safety. Hani Mahmoud is on the phone.
Yeah, so basically when what they refer to as the campaign of incitement against him, I'm just going to pull up what I posted yesterday. So you may remember this military intelligence product put out by the IDF. And I just said, to be clear, Israel put Anas on a death list over a year ago with other journalists, but he was protected by the size of his platform. They tracked his cell phone, his every move. They could have killed him at any time. They only chose to now because they determined the information blowback from assassinating him would be less than if he were alive to record the upcoming invasion of Gaza City. That's it. That's why now. Yeah, there's nothing really beyond that. So let's get into it. So since then, Israeli Hezbollah has been in overdrive trying to discredit him and claim he was Hamas, as if anyone cares anymore. I mean, he did make a few posts on his private Telegram channel that seemed to be in support of armed resistance, but, you know, whatever. Everyone's tired of this crap. And waged the sloppiest propaganda smear campaign I've ever seen. Because they didn't expect so much blowback from this, they're scrambling and putting out the worst information operations product we have ever seen. You know, it's been a cornerstone of Israel's genocidal campaign to lie every single day about everything possible and to come up with the most lunatic excuses possible. This is the military that lied about massacring the ambulance workers in Rafah. They lied about GHF massacres. They lied about the Shifa Hospital, the Flower Massacre, beheaded babies, Hamad Hospital, where terrorist shift rotations at the hospital turned out to be a calendar. The World Central Kitchen workers, babies in ovens, white phosphorus on civilians, Sinwar surrounding himself with 20 hostages in a tunnel, killing women and children with white flags, and their own hostages who had white flags who escaped their captors. Hind Rajab, et cetera, et cetera. We could all go on. We could talk about the parable of the boy who cried wolf. There are two readings of that. One is don't lie because no one will believe you. Another one is to never tell the same lie twice so people still believe you. Either way, there are no more lies left to tell, but Western media keeps on towing the line of abject falsehood. What does this mean for journalism? To discuss this, we are joined by Tara Sutton, who is an award-winning filmmaker and journalist who tells intimate stories about people living in extraordinary circumstances, focusing mostly on women and children. Over the last 20 years, she has covered the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Syrian refugee crisis, famine, the aftermath of genocide. She was the only unembedded Western reporter to enter Fallujah, Iraq during the siege in 2004, and her Guardian Films Channel 4 documentary, Fallujah Forensics, which exposed war crimes committed by the U.S. military, won the Amnesty International Award for News. She's appeared as a commentator on Al Jazeera, CBC, BBC, and speaks internationally on the plight of refugees in the Middle East. She's also a founding board member of the Collateral Repair Project, which assists the most vulnerable refugees of war in Amman, Jordan, and is a board member of the Trudeau Center for Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Toronto. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, let's get into this.
I'm a huge fan of yours, so I'm really happy to be here.
No, I really appreciate that, and thanks for taking the time.
Enraged by everything going on, like it's just beyond belief, and every time you think you've seen the worst, it keeps getting worse.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to start. So we talked about this last night when we were setting up this episode, and I suppose my first question is, after covering Iraq, which was a brutal urban warfare landscape, in the early days of the war, when it was like the hottest, is any of this actually surprising to you? I think you kind of already answered this, or is this sort of like an escalation in violence in like the colonialization or the coloniality of like the Western newsroom? From my military experience, it's definitely more violent than anything we did. But are you surprised by the media coverage of this?
There's a lot to unpack here. First of all, I would just say that definitely newsrooms are colonial. I mean, if you think about where foreign correspondents, like where it came from, it was kind of like, oh man, in Cairo, you know what I mean? Where some guy was just like sending out a telex about what was happening. And then that field just grew and grew and grew in a way that is really no longer necessary, as we've seen in Gaza. There's plenty of people who live there, who speak the language, who can do that job very well. And I think that one of the reasons why, the pro-Palestine movement grew so quickly was the fact that Palestinian journalists were showing you what the aftermath of a bomb falling really looks like. And I think that the colonial or Western news media has always really sanitized that, right? So people would never get to see it. And I think that one of the other amazing things about it was that we didn't have like journalists, like the big names coming in and bigfooting everybody out and sort of, presenting these stories that are, again, it's like one distance of remove, right? When you see people who are just right there, it brings you right there. And so I feel like in a way, the general public or at least people who are paying attention and are following Gazans are able to kind of see what I saw as a reporter, right? Which is the incredible kindness of people and the utter horror that is really hard to get across when you have this sort of filtering mechanism, which is mainstream media. And then nothing would have prepared me for the amount of journalists that have been targeted. It's just, I can't wrap my head around it. It's just too big to kind of be able to properly focus on. Obviously, with Hossam Shabat and Anas al-Sharif, I have been watching those guys for 22 months. And so it's really feels very personal to see people that you've become you feel so attached to be murdered. And the other thing I think is important to point out is they weren't murdered in the field, right? Like, obviously being a conflict reporter is a dangerous job. We all know that, right? Like, you can be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And in Iraq in the beginning, that was like your fear of death is like, oh, I'm going to be somewhere and a roadside bomb's going to go off, or I'm going to get caught in the crossfire. It's not, I'm going to be sitting in the tent that is set up for me to do my job, and that's going to be bombed. You know, it's sort of like the hospital bombing. Like, you used to think hospitals were a safe place, and every conflict, there's always media tents. There's places where everybody can file from and plug in their laptops and get internet. And I'm sure in Gaza, it was a lot worse than anything I've ever worked out of just because of the situation, but it's still a known, supposedly safe area in a conflict zone. And that's just been destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things that were huge scandals during the unfortunately named and ill-fated global war on terror that were atrocious. Obama's signing off on bombing the wedding convoy in Yemen, killed a bunch of civilians. None of the quote-unquote Al-Qaeda guys that were there, they all apparently got away. The Kunduz hospital bombing in Afghanistan in 2015, that was Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. That was a huge scandal and involved a cover-up. And then from Iraq, the WikiLeaks Apache helicopter tape where a number of Al Jazeera journalists who had like an extended camera. So the pilot was asking for the green light to engage because he said it was an RPG. It clearly wasn't an RPG. No. So that was a huge scandal. And
but
then
there were scandals where it's like none of this stuff is a scandal, right? I mean, the America seems better able to. The American media seems better able to report on its own country's scandals and hold them to account than anything that they're doing with Israel. Which is, you know, very curious.
Now, I definitely want to talk about something we discussed last night, and that was like this war on Al Jazeera in general. Because when I was in, you know, early 2010s, I was just told, even though, like, you know, I was plugged into intelligence circles, I had a top secret security clearance, like military people, even if they think they're smart and they have access to like all this information, they exist in an echo chamber, and nobody really reads the local news because, you know, you're told it's propaganda. And Al Jazeera was like the pinnacle of that. And I think like one of my things that kind of really prejudiced against me is like they did file a couple of like reports about what like special operations forces were doing in Afghanistan, and I knew it was incorrect, but that like prejudiced me for years. And they're the only ones, and they're supposed to be like out of Qatar, which is a comprador state with like the U.S. government and empire, but they're actually doing reporting. So I don't know, like, what was your experience with like Al Jazeera and how people?
I mean, first of all, when I was in Iraq, Al Jazeera didn't exist. They hadn't done their English channel yet. It only was broadcasting in Arabic, and it was something that was always on in the background. And it would always shock me because, you know, in our house that I lived in, we would have like Al Jazeera on one channel, and then we would have, you know, American news on another channel. And the Al Jazeera was always showing exactly the type of things that people are seeing now, which is like shredded bodies and people being pulled out of burning buildings, right? So I think that I mean, your story, I'm sure I'd like to hear about that when you said they were incorrect. But I think that when they're just showing the aftermath of people's violence, I don't think that's propaganda. I think it's just that they don't want people to see that. I mean, first Al Jazeera was bombed in Kabul in 2001 by the Americans. Al Jazeera was bombed in 2003. Their anchor, Tariq Ayoub, who is also Palestinian, was blown up when he was on the roof getting ready to go live. When I was in Fallujah in 2003, the only broadcaster in there was Al Jazeera. And when there was a ceasefire after about 2 weeks of fighting, and one of the conditions of the ceasefire was that the Al Jazeera reporter leave, because nobody else was inside, and so everybody was picking up the Al Jazeera feed. So that footage was being shown on, all over the world. And at one point during a press conference, I remember somebody asked Brigadier General Mark Kimmett about, the fact that Al Jazeera was showing all of these civilian casualties, and his response was change the channel to a legitimate, authoritative news channel. In other words, one of ours. And I think that if you think about that, that just shows you how much they are aware that their media is somewhat controlled. Change the channel to our media. Don't believe this. It's like, people keep saying, don't believe your eyes, don't believe your ears. Don't believe the people who are from the region, who speak the language. Don't believe what they're seeing. The idea that somehow they're making all of this stuff up is just so insane, and it's really pervasive. I mean, I made a film in Fallujah. I was telling you a bit about this last night. This was before the battle. I was in there trying to figure out, why are all the insurgents coming from this area? And it was like, oh, guess what? The Marines opened up on a protest and killed 17 people. It's not just like, oh, why do, everybody hates us. There's a reason. And we found a guy who told us that he had been detained for 29 days. And he talked about being beaten, and he talked about being kept in something called the Mouse House, which was like a small cage. And he showed us his tags and his paperwork that showed he had been detained. And when I was doing I've always been freelance, but this was, the BBC picked this up. And after, when I was showing the editors my report, they were like, oh, well, you don't possibly believe him, do you? Right? About this Iraqi guy. But and I had to fight to be like, yeah, I believe him. Why is he saying words in English that he can't say in any other language? Why does he have the tags? And also, why can't you believe that American soldiers could be violent? Meanwhile, we also spent time with the U.S. military, and we have a guy, for example, saying, he went in and 6 of his guys had been wounded and 1 had been killed. They didn't say, check that out. You know what I mean? So there's this sort of colonial mentality that the natives can't possibly be telling the truth, and we have to hold them to extra special account.
I mean, I actually think that's entirely true. Just to kind of bring this home too, every journalist that's been killed in Gaza has had to be the perfect victim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the thing, because the Israeli society is obsessed with, things like rape and physical
mm-hmm.
domination. And that's Darvo stuff. What did you do to
mm-hmm.
deserve getting drone struck or
mm-hmm.
having a 2,000-pound bomb dropped on you? So when it comes to Anas, if we can just pull up this Nazi platform, basically it's all full of this guy. Former hostage fires back at Sky News. Press vest isn't a get out of jail free pass for terrorists. They're bringing up some tweets that he made, on Telegram or on his Telegram channel, in support of, Palestinian armed resistance, which I don't think international law is the thing. It's clearly not. So we're not going to harp on how it's supposed to be enshrined there.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, if you're not the perfect peace-loving Palestinian,
mm-hmm.
you deserve essentially to die. And the thing about the perfect
if you are the perfect peace-loving Palestinian, you're going to die anyway, right?
Well, because the perfect victim is a movable goalpost, and they don't even attempt to abide by it because you have ministers who are in charge of military and foreign policy saying mm-hmm. there are no innocents in Gaza. So it's just what is this propaganda push? Exactly. And I think as a journalist who's, worked as an independent with some major outlets, I know you published an article in The Guardian after we got arrested in the Senate about vets, being disenchanted with Israel and wanting to pressure the government to stop arming them. I was just wondering what, how, institutionally, all these journalists could be okay, we're just going to toe the line with the New York Times editorial board.
Yeah,
what's
that's
up
a tricky one for me because I have an authority problem. So I've always been independent. So
mm-hmm.
I haven't worked within a journalistic institution, right? So I'm not sitting at, and I actually don't think most of the journalists that are actually going out and doing reporting are the ones who are sitting in meetings that may be happening about what they can say and what they can't say.
Mm-hmm.
But I have been so disappointed and shocked with so many of my colleagues that they're not my friends, but just people that I know who haven't said anything about this. In fact, I'm like, at this point, I'm more aware of people who have been speaking out. Do you know what I mean? Than the ones who haven't.
Because it's so rare.
Because it's so rare. I think that it's tricky. I go back and forth, right? Because so many news channels are problematic. And then it's also like they have these huge platforms. So it's like there's a journalist I've always really admired, Arwa Damon, who worked for CNN, who left now, and she has her own not-for-profit in Ara where she helps children who have been badly burned in conflict. And she was always their conflict reporter who would go in and tell the civilian side of the story, right? Mm-hmm. Well, she was like the counterbalance to all the other manufacturing consent that went on. And so it's like, well, should she not work for them because of all the other crap that they put out? Or is it important to at least have some of the voice of, the people who are being injured coming across? But there's been like pressure, like, as I said, I remember an argument I had with Channel 4 about that same Fallujah film where we were using Al Jazeera footage where an entire family had been killed. And I had put in like 5 cuts of dead children. And the editor who was in charge of the news section said, "Oh, you can't put all that in. People don't want to see that while they're having dinner." And I was just like, what?
Sorry to inconvenience you about dead families.
Right? Like, and so we had this back and forth, and it ended up, she wanted 1 and we ended up with 3. And I'm like, how am I having this type of an argument? And you're publishing like a hard-hitting piece that accuses the U.S. military of war crimes, but somehow something inside of you is stopping this. And I do think people have this internalized propaganda who have grown up in the West as well. So I think that there's a lot of like self-censorship from people's upbringing, which I saw a lot in American journalists in Iraq.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, we want to make these hard-hitting pieces that are going to get a lot of engagement, save the paper, but we kind of want it to also remain like in the ether, not rooted into anything like that could affect people on an emotional level, like images of dead children.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're seeing coming out of Gaza every day. Some of the worst massacres in Iraq or the worst bombing mishaps or intentional haps in Afghanistan that like made international news like once every few years are now happening like every day. And
people are seeing it again. I think that is like, I can't overstate how important I think that is, and why again we all owe such an enormous debt of gratitude to all the Palestinian journalists and just regular people who are showing us what is happening in their lives. Because I don't think that without them, there would not be any of the sort of pushback that there is. People would just be like, it's like quietly going on in the background. Not huge numbers of people dying,
Yeah. Before we get into like how do we think that this will that this quote unquote conflict, live stream genocide. Sorry guys. I'm just using the neoliberal verbiage.
No, I think I'm pretty sure we all know where you stand on that.
Yeah. So before we talk about like what this has done to journalism on an institutional level, maybe I just kind of wanted to break down for the audience real quick about, despite all the propaganda, because my whole thing, the reason I started doing this was specifically to debunk military propaganda. So I am going to talk about the specifics of this kinetic strike that happened. And we're going to do it by pulling up there's a lot more graphic videos. This is going on YouTube. And plus we don't need to be seeing that again. But here's the thing. Okay. Before we get into this, my expertise in this, before I became very much anti-war, anti-interventionist, I transitioned from like an assault role in my like special operations unit into more like an intelligence role, which is meant like I was in the tactical operations center during the day. Then I'd go out at night with the strike force to be like the intel guy essentially. But a lot of the times, and I didn't work directly on drone strikes. They were like in another cubicle section in the Tactical Operations Center. But of course, I'd be paying attention to like what they were doing and how they were doing things, because if they weren't able to get like a high value target and eliminate it, that means you'd have to send in like a Ranger platoon or a SEAL team. So that means like if they weren't able to do it, that means I'd have to go out that night and interrogate the guy and try to determine who he was, so we could, you know, bring him back for questioning and stuff. So I was always like really paying attention to like what the kinetic strike targeting cycle was. So basically what they do and how they do it, it hasn't really changed, because military equipment like Hellfire missiles, drones, they take like decades to develop. Like some of our most advanced weapons and weapon systems were developed in the 80s. But because it takes so much time, it's the same equipment that they're using now that we were using back in like 2013. Okay. So nothing's really changed. The only thing that has really changed is the implementation of artificial intelligence into the intelligence synchronization cycle. So you have fewer people that have to monitor things. So one of the main ways to track people is through their cell phone signals, okay? All journalists have cell phones, and they know they're being tracked. And I've made a lot of videos about how this happens. Usually, like 10 years ago when I was in, you'd have to have a person on it, you know, constantly monitoring a bunch of these like signals, and like it's overlaid on like a really special version of like Google Earth. So you can see where all these handsets are and like if they're converging together. Now you don't need as many people to actually evaluate that. You know, you can just have an AI program. But basically what they're doing is they're looking at all these journalists that they killed with their cell phones. And I'm not 100% sure on this, but this is how it works. Same equipment, same targeting process. Someone was looking at all their cell phones, and they're seeing that they're all co-located in the tent. All right. And then once they were all co-located, the entire team, somebody in the Tactical Operations Center in the targeting cell was like, okay, green light, drop it. So that's most likely what happened. Again, this is supposition based on my experience, but this is kind of how it works. So it was a conscious decision to wait till they were all together, one fell swoop. And here is the main thing. All right. So after all these years, like almost 2 years of watching this, we've seen incredible battle damage, you know, and most of Gaza is completely devastated, right? Look at this. There's no crater. There's no destroyed buildings. It's just the tent, which was blown apart by the blast. This was not a bomb. This was most likely something like a Hellfire missile shot from a drone. Hellfire missiles are precision munitions. They can be shot in a certain way to like only take one guy out in a group of people or the entire group. There's not a crater because you can set it to air detonate. So like a couple feet off the ground. Okay. So if you don't see a crater, that's probably because they could have put a setting so it could air burst down and send the shrapnel down into everybody. Yeah, so that was a precision munitions, because I've been tracking this since the start. The bunker buster bombs are to clear out Gaza. The precision munitions are to kill journalists and aid workers. And one of the reasons you want to use precision missiles is because it's easier to make sure that they're actually dead. Because if you drop a 2,000-pound bomb, everything's destroyed. So did you get the guy? Did you not? Did they somehow miraculously survive? But right now, after the drone strike happened, they have a thermal imaging suite, which you can actually monitor people's body temperature. So as the body temperature is reducing, you can be like, okay, make an assessment. That guy's probably not alive anymore. So you can do what's called a aerial battle damage assessment. So right after the drone strike, that drone was still in a holding pattern, observing all the casualties getting taken care of by first responders, and they made a determination. So there's no doubt in my mind that this was absolutely a targeted strike, because every time they kill journalists, they don't use bombs. They use these precision weapons.
Well, I think the other part of it is it's like a psychological operation on their colleagues, right? They have to pull they can see it's their colleagues and they're pulling them out. Like, that's part of, I think, their sadistic nature. Is to terrorize everybody around them, right? Like they're trying, I think they probably haven't realized how committed Palestinians are And so they're trying to scare them and thinking, if we show them what's happened to their colleagues, maybe they're going to stop.
I mean, if they haven't after 2 years, I don't know.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I'm in touch with journalists in Gaza, and some of them are like 19 years old, and they just started 2 months ago, and they got like 800 followers on Instagram and like 30 followers on Twitter. But like, it's kind of like Hamas or like any resistance group within the Strip. Like you
don't need training to be a journalist. You just actually have to like want to tell the truth and also to be there. And
it's like you're either gonna go, and if you're an angry kid because they've created a whole new acronym, wounded child, no surviving family, well, you're gonna become a journalist, or you're gonna join an armed group, or you're gonna do something with a lot of pissed off young men and women as well.
Yeah.
So they're just going to keep doing this, but that is a good point about the psychological operation. We're not going to destroy the bodies because you need to recover them.
And the thing that just killed me yesterday is, I don't know if you realize, but one of Anas's best friend is another journalist. He's called Wada, and his wife has, what's the disease? It's like, it has an acronym. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but there are increasing cases of it happening in Gaza. And essentially you just die in 10 days. It attacks your nervous system. So this guy has been, for the last 3 days, for the first time, he was like, I'm not talking, I'm not reporting, I'm telling you about my wife. She has this thing. They're telling me, the doctors say, if she doesn't get medicine, within 10 days, she's going to die. There's like a picture of him. She's not even in the hospital. She's on a bed outside of the hospital. And so yesterday morning, he posted that like he got medicine for her because everybody was talking about it. Somehow medicine got in to the Jordanian field hospital, and he was so happy. And he was just like, I have this medicine that's saving my wife's life. So imagine you're going through 4 days thinking your wife is going to die and you're going to be left with 3 little kids. You finally get relief from that. And then your best friend is like blown up. Like, I just couldn't, I was like, how much can somebody take in a day? And that was another thing that I know what I so appreciated you when I first saw you talking about, how you could tell because of the munitions that they were using and the way that they were using them, that this was not normal. And for me, it was things like, it is not normal for a journalist to be, this is in the first week, driving in a car holding 2 bleeding babies. It is not normal for journalists to go into hospitals and see their family members. Like, to me, that was why it was so clearly genocidal from that type of information. Like, that just isn't a normal conflict in any way from sort of the start.
Yeah. And this actually is a great segue into my kind of like what I wanted to talk about last at the last part of this was other journalists who had served like in the field, like CNN's Clarissa Ward. She's been covering conflicts in West Asia and the Middle East for a long time. Like, how could she not see what's going on?
I mean, I think for people at that level, there's a tremendous amount of ego, right? Like, you're sort of like a celebrity. And also, I think, a lot of journalists like that go into work for think tanks afterwards. So they're already sort of maybe believing in the party line. And then the other thing is, she would want to be there, right? Like, I think as much as for all the problems I have with the BBC and with CNN and everything, there are producers who are sitting there looking at all the footage coming in and then shaping it into documentaries and narratives, like The Doctors Under Fire, which the BBC refused to publish. But they recently did one on children being killed, where they sort of forensically using doctor testimonies and looking at, using footage and geolocating everything, we're proving, okay, there were soldiers here, this kid was here, here's an x-ray of a bullet in his head. And they're just, able to kind of investigate and prove what is going on. But those are the producers whose face, you're never going to see their face, right? Whereas the big on-air personalities, like, they have to go because they have to be there. They're not, and I'm sure part of that is their job description too, right?
Yeah. No, it was funny. My friend, the activist Rama Zain, she actually confronted Clarissa.
I love that. That was so amazing. And it's so true. I'm like, this is how the Arab world thinks.
Yeah, no, because like Clarissa Ward, she ducked taking mortar fire. There was no rocket fire in her area.
I didn't do a lot of like live reporting. I mean, occasionally I would be called in because they need some freelancer to talk about it, and some producer would get my number. People would go on the roof and put on their flak jacket to like go on air. Like, you're standing on a roof, nobody's coming to get you, right? Because they have to play up this kind of like, I'm a brave war reporter. Like, I actually remember seeing, I can't remember who it was, in the green zone, inside the convention center, which is where the U.S. military would do all of their press conferences. So to get into the green zone at that point, it was like going through 9 versions of airport security, like a cavity search. Like, nothing was getting in there. And she was standing in the convention center, lit up with a flak jacket on. I'm like, you don't need that, honey. But there is a certain amount of theater involved in it's entertainment to a certain extent.
And that is kind of what I wanted to get into. Like, how has now that we have access to what's actually going on the ground in a way that's unprecedented before, like how is mainstream media going to reconcile this new age where people are losing confidence in them? And we also talked about the U.S. government last night. Like, they're putting these narratives forward, and then a lot of reporters will actually reflect or pass on or perpetuate, because there's something to be said for access journalism. You want access to powerful people, you have to say what they want you to say, put forward, but it's not really working anymore. And you
need access to powerful people, because powerful people mostly are going to lie, and they can just put it out in a press release. Like, sorry, that's just an aside, but like, I think having access to the disenfranchised is a lot more important if you want to be a reporter. But well, again, they do have to do that. Yeah. So I don't know. And it just seems like the administration, both Democrats and Republicans, are kind of like doubling down and being like, okay, we're lying about this. This is horrible. But you know what? Shut up. We're going to do it anyways. They are going to do it anyway. That was a sad thing I kind of saw in Iraq, right? Like, as a young journalist thinking like, oh my God, I'm going to expose all these things and it's going to change something. And then just like, it didn't fucking change a thing. It made a record. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's proof, but it didn't change anything. Like, I feel like when they know they're going to do a crime, they're going to finish the crime. And until now, I always thought Iraq was like the greatest crime I would see in my lifetime. And now I'm like, oh, this one's even bigger and worse and sociopathic on top of it. Because I don't think that either the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan were genocidal. There was definitely a lack of concern for civilian life, but there wasn't this seething hatred for every single person. I don't know. You were in the military. Did you feel that your comrades were kind of like, I'm sure they called them like Hajis and towel heads and bad guys, but did they think every child was a potential threat?
No, actually, some people might not believe this, but like, my platoon never killed anyone that didn't have a gun actively in their hand. Like, I mean, look, I'll be serious. Like, every fire team had a drop gun just in case.
Okay.
So that was some sketchy cop shit, but it never actually happened, luckily. So I don't. But no, it wasn't an institutional. That's what genocide is at this level. It's an institutionalized policy targeting a single group of people. We were targeting foreign fighters coming from Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. We weren't going to go and go into this village and like do some My Lai stuff. Just to punish the civilian. I'm like, of course, there's a reason I got radicalized. Yeah. And I've never apologized for my role in the U.S. empire, but it wasn't like this. And so this is what's bizarre, and why I keep like hoping somehow that this will like change journalism in some way going forward. Just how egregious this is, because like the gaslighting is on a whole nother level. You didn't have Donald Rumsfeld saying like, kill every Iraqi baby, they're all snakes. Like, human animals.
Everybody's like, it's okay. Israel has a right to defend itself. Like, it's just bizarre. So like, it was just more, it's hard for me to think at the time that like anything run by George Bush Jr. could be described as sophisticated. But in comparison to the Israeli Hasbara, it was like one level below being so obviously a lie. And one of the things I actually was thinking about after Anas's murder was how, just the fact that Israel even gets to say, and it's repeated as fact, like, oh, he was running a terror cell. Like, first of all, I'd love to know how you can be on air all the time and be running a terror cell at the same time. Like, that's some Superman level stuff. But, there was the Minister of Information in Iraq, this guy called Mohammed al-Saif. He was christened by the press Comical Alley. Chemical Alley was the guy in charge of the biological weapons. And then they called this guy Comical Alley, or Baghdad Bob, because he was telling such lies. He'd be like,
I remember.
Right?
I remember Baghdad Bob.
Remember Baghdad Bob? Okay, so he became Baghdad Bob because he was shown to be lying, right? So how many, Israel has never, you can constantly prove that they're lying, and yet we're still quoting them. And I'm just like, okay, if you guys want to be Middle Eastern, why aren't you getting treated like all the other Middle Eastern leaders who are always ridiculed and assumed to be lying? But somehow, it's just not, there's no sort of false equivalency. I've never seen a journalist in any other conflict be killed and right away it's like, oh, but it's because actually,
that is a first. I think I haven't seen.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. Mostly if it's a Western journalist, everybody just writes these glowing reviews. They don't bring up all the stories that they told that could have been wrong, because people make mistakes. It's the first draft of history, blah, blah, blah. No one's ever like, and last year they said this and it was wrong, it's just beyond anything. I think that one of the reasons in the lead up to this, there are a lot of Israeli media watchdog organizations, like Canary is one of them. And I have friends who work, I have a friend who works at the AP, and they are just relentless at harassing journalists and editors, because they have this sort of freelance army of, I think there's 16,000 people. And they'll post on their website, they said this, they called them the occupied territories instead of the West Bank. And then 1,000 people write a letter to this editor, and news people are already sort of crushed under, decreasing.
Correspondence.
Yeah. Anybody in the editors, they all have way more work than they used to because the budgets have been cut and there's just a lot less people. And so I think that even if it's not intentional, when you are constantly, I'm talking about this going on for years, when you're constantly being harassed anytime you do anything, eventually you could just start kind of sliding okay, I'm not going to call them the occupied territories. I'm going to call it the West Bank because
I'm trying to get a story out.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a story out. And tomorrow my inbox is going to have 1,000 emails in it. I'm not saying that it's right, but I think that it's because this propaganda has been going on for so long that it has people in newsrooms who are just normal people who aren't in the upper levels, who are talking about God knows fucking what, just have been, harangued to a point. I'm not saying it's correct, but I think that is a part of the way that things have always been reported in the kind of ongoing pro-Israeli propaganda. Come at me, Canary.
Yeah, I wasn't in academia when I started talking about this, so I never got I got doxxed by other groups. I forget which ones, but I don't know. Just do you see the media landscape changing because of this in any substantial way? I know it's hard to tell or predict, but everything still seems so entrenched. You've got magazines, in Germany, posting that Anas was a terrorist, actually towing the Hasbara line. And of course, all the right-wing media in a country like that is always going to do that. But CNN reporters, Fox News, people at the AP, Reuters, do they not know that journalists are their colleagues from another country are being intentionally
I don't even
targeted
know
by
if
the
they
state?
really think of them as their colleagues, to be honest. I didn't go to a lot of press conferences during my time covering conflict because I like to kind of be interviewing people in the field, but a lot of people are sent to cover that, and there was such a division. It's like the classroom, where the popular kids sit on one side and then the jocks sit on another side. Like the Arab reporters or the Iraqi reporters were always in one place, and then all the Western journalists were in another place. It was like, I don't know, it was just weird and colonial.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't function that way.
No, I don't either. I'm like, why would you be here if you don't want to actually talk to people from a place? Just go home. But
I'm here to be on camera with my cute little flak vest.
Right? I'm here to sit in the green zone and just like take down whatever Kimmett and his Dan Senor. Oh my God, I hate that man so much. He was like Kimmett's lackey. He's now married to somebody who's on the news, and he has some think tank position. Look him up. He's a real treat. He was like the Matt Miller of Iraq.
Okay, yeah. I mean,
just like twisting everything. Nothing's ever what you think you saw. Like the same. I mean, that was kind of, I feel like people got to see what went on in those news conferences that wasn't broadcast because there just wasn't the sort of 24-hour cycle, or you know what I mean? But that's what it was like. Like you'd ask a question and then you just get a Matt Miller answer, which is also why I didn't go.
I'm wondering now, like after the example set by journalists in Gaza, a lot of whom didn't go to graduate school for journalism. And of course, like that's also a very colonial mindset. It's like, where'd you get your degree?
Yeah.
How can you be reporting on these things without?
You really do not need a degree to be a journalist at all. You just need to be there and like write down what you see.
Yeah.
I mean, there's obviously so many different types of journalists, but you don't need a degree. I mean, in the old days, people used to start out in the ink room, in newspapers and work their way up. It wasn't like a training.
So I guess like that is also part of the coloniality, is like you haven't gone to a Western journalism school, or you don't have even a bachelor's degree from someplace, And of course, journalists who grew up in, Jordan or Iraq are probably not going to have had the opportunity to go to Columbia School of Journalism, So that's another barrier of entry that kind of like shapes the narrative around that and blocks people from access to this. And of course, Edward Said wrote about this, the institutionalized racism within Western liberal universities in his seminal book, Orientalism. And we're kind of like seeing that play out through the entire journalism spectrum right now. And I'm just kind of hoping that maybe this is all leading people to like find alternative media.
I think so. I hope so. I mean, I don't read the media. I get my news through social media. And I mean, I know I have the time and the interest to do that, but I will look at so many different sources and then and if I'm interested in something, I'll go a little deeper and I'll try to find somebody else and then just like, verify it my own way by making sure, there's a number of people that saw it. So, and the other thing is now, like the traditional or the mainstream media is lagging behind what you find on, like we saw the ambulance workers get shot 2 days before it started appearing in the news, right? So you're seeing everything first. So I don't know how they're going to
keep up.
Happen. I mean, I think there's just, I don't know. There's so many conversations around this, right? Because there's the whole rise of AI and deep fakes and fake news and people not believing anything. So I definitely think that there's going to be an erosion and there's going to be, I mean, I think what's good now is there are multiple channels. You know what I mean? There's so many, there's the Young Turks, there's you, there's Midas, there's the Teo. Whatever you think of any of these channels, they exist because there's enough people that want to see something different. I think that the thing that makes me concerned is, the big news organizations are the ones that can fund deep investigative work, right? They're the ones like, I could go to Fallujah for a month and pay $100 a day for my translator and $100 a day for my driver and buy food for everybody because I had like a mainstream channel backing it. I wouldn't have been able to do that otherwise. Like you can't just, I'm sure you'd love to go over to the Middle East and dig around, but like you probably don't have the means to do that. So I don't know. I feel like a lot can also be lost by not having, I don't know. It's confusing.
I mean, that's a really good point because, I could go to the Middle East, and because, I've had the opportunity to like become self-employed basically through like subscriptions, that like fund my travel. Like, I'm paycheck to paycheck, but I'm still able to like fly places. But like, beyond like room and board and plane tickets,
Those
like
are
hiring people,
expensive, they're so expensive, especially if you want to actually pay people properly. But that's I think another layer of the colonialism of foreign reporting that I want to bring up is that as much as, there's this huge movement. I actually signed a petition, and now I'm like, I don't know why I signed that, but, of all these journalists saying, let people in. Because, it's like we're independent, because somehow if you're from a place, you can't be independent. Like you can't report on Texas, Greg, because you're from Texas. So
I'm biased.
You're obviously going to be lying. But the thing is, as soon as you get in there, you're hiring a local person to translate for you. So if apparently these people can't be trusted, then what if they're translating everything wrong, right? So it's really, you're just slapping a Western face on top of this information gathering operation that completely relies on local people.
That is an excellent point that I hadn't considered for some reason. When I was doing like field interrogations and tactical questioning, I had to get rid of 2 interrogators because they were mistranslating. Because like I went to language school for Dari Persian.
Oh, okay, so you could tell.
Well, at the beginning, I would never tell them that I knew enough to understand what they're saying, and especially knew enough to understand if they're not saying what I want them to say, or what I'm asking them to say. So yeah, that's definitely a thing too. So it's like, why don't you just cut out the middleman and like the foreign journalist?
But that's what I think is amazing about social media and just the fact that everybody is empowered enough to at least to show people what's happening to them. And another thing, we mentioned this briefly, that I think is, and this relates to Gaza, but I see it happening elsewhere, obviously, is I know I've become very close to a guy in Gaza who's become like, I talk to him every day, and I ask him shit. I'm like, what's happening? Like, as soon as they started saying Hamas is stealing the aid, he was like, no, it's criminal gangs. They're stealing it. The soldiers watch them, and so, which is, that's reporting, right? Asking people what they see. But I heard that like 2 months before it was reported on. And I think that there's a lot of people, because I see it in the comments, who through things like GoFundMe have become pen pals with people in Gaza who are hearing everything straight from the horse's mouth and realizing how much they're being lied to. I don't know. It's like a very big question, right? Because in a way you're like, what's the purpose of journalism in a really connected world? And
to synthesize information, to become a trusted voice that people don't have to search for themselves. Because most people, they want to be informed, but they also don't have enough time to do the research themselves. So you try to spend years building up credibility and building up sources. And there are some people that I know that I'm among a few people that certain individuals only follow and only listen to. So I try to I've
always felt that as a journalist. I'm like, the only thing I have is my integrity. The only reason I can convince anybody to talk to me is because they feel like I'm going to be truthful to what they said. Like I'm not, but I don't know. I don't know that everybody, I can't see why anybody would have that faith now in any of the mainstream organizations, because the mask has fallen so far off.
So, this is kind of my final point / question, is that, a lot of people, I think, within the media, the legacy media apparatus kind of know what's going on is wrong, and they're eventually going to have to like do some revisionist history on themselves, and they're reporting just like Piers Morgan is doing right now, because he was a straight Hezbollahist, during the first year and a half. And it wasn't until this complete blockade of food, mass starvation as a matter of state policy, that he's only started to ask actual questions of these propagandists. So he's going to try to do a reform. I think a lot of people are going to try to do a reform. what's the comment about like liberals, especially in the media, they're against every war except the current one.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Canada, who just had its reckoning with mass graves of children, but apparently didn't learn anything from that.
In some ways,
like the same thing happening in Gaza, and just.
Yeah, I mean, we forget that the Canada was almost. Actually, in some ways, more brutal towards the indigenous population.
That's what I keep saying to people. I'm like, we're just watching what happened. This is how we got our country. It was probably slower, and it wasn't filmed.
Yeah. And so my question is like, Iraq. Everyone pretty much universally agrees that was a big whoopsie. And people report on it like that, like journalists who were over there in like the mid 2000s, basically towing the line, manufacturing consent, are now pretending like, the Iraq war was a mistake. They lied about weapons of mass destruction, and like you were selling, State Department talking points. I mean, do you see a similar thing happening in 10 years?
I mean, I think it's already started to happen, and this is what I kind of thought at the beginning. When in the beginning of Gaza, I saw so many similarities to the beginning of the Iraq war, and I'm like, they change their mind when it's too late. They manufacture consent, they beat the drum of war, and then once the you can't unroll the operation, like it's going on then, and I think it's just to like win prizes and have a conscience. Then they start doing like the human interest stories and talking about it. It's like too late. Like your job was supposed to be to sort of inform people. I mean, if you look at the New York Times, they manufactured consent. They had to print an apology letter, right? About the fact that Judith Miller had interviewed Ahmed al-Chalabi, and he said that there were, weapons of mass destruction. And I'm just like, I don't even believe that they thought that was true. You know what I mean? But then they kind of like come back but in the first 6 months, like their senior correspondent, John F. Burns, the first night of shock and awe, he wrote this article where he described seeing the American missiles, falling through the sky as biblical. Like, dude,
praise Jesus.
What?
Praise Jesus.
Oh, hallelujah. I mean, it's just so, but I also do think that and as I was saying, again, there are so many different people in a lot of newsrooms, and there are the people that are going to kind of go in and do the press conferences and write all that stuff. And then there are the people who, probably push to do different stories. And it's not necessarily, the person that kind of wrote the biblical bomb story is not the same person that is going to have been writing about all the kids that were orphaned in general. So I don't know what I can't even remember how I got onto that. Oh yeah. Do I think the same thing? Yeah, it will happen. And I really hope people get held to account. I really hope, because the media should have been held to account then, and they weren't. And I hope that, with people being better organized, they will. There needs to be a journalism Hind Rajab Foundation where, it's forensic and things that people said versus the truth comes out, and people are prosecuted.
Well, the internet is now, until civilization dissolves, is now forever, and so that didn't exist.
That's a good thing.
That didn't exist.
No, but it's the same story. It's the same much, much worse and more intense story of, because I think about 6 months ago was when you started to see the shift. It was oh, enough people are dead now. Gaza's 70% destroyed. Now we're going to be oh, poor civilians. The fact that nobody wrote that every hospital was destroyed, that there wasn't a huge investigation into that, but yet when the MSF hospital was bombed
in 2015
in Afghanistan, it was on the front of the news for 2 weeks. I mean, I don't even know what to say.
Well, I think some enterprising civilians should create a community archive of everyone who manufactured consent, because there's going to be a mass deleting of tweets, a mass deleting of social media posts, and I don't have time to do it. But everybody has their role in the struggle, and you know what? That's That's kind of a little bit of journalism right there if you want to pick it up, and you don't need a degree.
Yeah, you don't need a degree.
Yeah.
You just need to be there.
So I guess we're just going to end with the sentiment again that, you know, you're going to have to find a way to explain to your grandkids, you know, how third grade military propaganda turned you into a bloodthirsty lunatic that manufactured consent for a genocide just so you could get on camera and pretend to dodge rocket fire. Anyways.
Yeah. Everyone has propaganda except the West, right?
No.
That's the story. Just one more thing. You know, all of these countries that live under non-democracies, everybody fucking knows the government is lying to them and it's propaganda. Like, they're so aware of that from the time they're tiny. Right? But the better propaganda, I think, is to be like, no, we tell you the truth, you know? And so then people just don't think they're being propagandized. And I do think there's like a mass awakening going on. But
yeah. I mean, you know, we've been propagandized by like Western supremacy for hundreds of years too. You know, it's, you know, there have been cultural shifts in like other regions of the world, and there's been social upheavals. Aside from like the French Revolution and the American Revolution, there hasn't really been one, you know. In the Cold War propaganda really did a number on the U.S. and British and European populations. So I would just like to say and end with this. You can't understand what's happening in Palestine without these three frameworks. 1, colonialism. It's land theft for resource extraction. 2, capitalism. Corporate and state powers colluding for resource extraction and money. And 3, white supremacy. Dehumanize brown people so their deaths for the above don't register. And that third part is important in the media to discount all the Palestinian journalists. Because again, you know, people, we need consent to be manufactured. And part of the manufacturing of consent is to get people to not care about brown people, to say, hey, you don't have a journalism degree. You can't report. You know, we can't trust anything that's coming out of Gaza because, you know, these people lie. And, you know, it's all, again, about money. A lot of our legacy media are controlled by billionaires and corporate interests. And so that's where you trace it back to.
Yeah, trust the person who just got parachuted in for 2 weeks who doesn't speak the language, because they are going to be able to tell you what's going on.
Oh my God. Yeah, my partner, she talks all the time about parachute journalism. So I mean, we're kind of out of time right now, but yes, I would listen to a local journalist who's been at it for, you know, a little bit of time over a parachute journalist, you know, from, you know, Queens any day of the week. So thank you all so much. And thank you, Tara, for coming on and talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Well, we're going to be wrapping it up here, and we won't have time for a Q&A today. I'm so sorry, but we will be back Thursday to talk about, I don't know, something like Russia-Ukraine ceasefire. Who knows? You know, the news cycle, again, is so insane. So y'all stay sane out there. It's Monday evening, and we are signing out. Cheers, y'all.
Bye.